So when I go around the country, around the world, people ask about FRMS, I hear all kinds of rumors, what it is and what it isn't. And it's nice to explain that, but I thought I'd try to do it today sort of quickly on maybe 10 key concepts that get confused or misstated. So we're going to go through these one by one, and hopefully by the end of that, you'll see the difference, and as you see following speakers, they'll clarify even more what I'm trying to say. Some people say, well, this FRMS reduces safety because it eliminates flight duty time limits and that really assure crews are rested. We really need to ask the crews how they're legal. And I would argue that's not the case. Instead, it improves safety by addressing factors that prescriptive limits don't address. The critical difference now is, it's not are you legal, it's are you tired? That's a major change in thinking in operations today. It enables management of risk irrespective of the cause, as I mentioned earlier. It doesn't matter what caused the fatigue, we're going to look at what it is. And it enables operators to mitigate fatigue risk in a measurable way. We're not guessing now. We have data. I've watched at Air New Zealand where they've actually changed entire schedules based on data of fatigue coming from cabin crew. Cabin crew data said, this isn't working, they're not getting the sleep they need. We'll change the route, and they did, and it worked. So you got to also not only make it work for you, for the operator, you got to make it for the crews, and you got to follow the data. Operational flexibility. Some would say, well, it's just designed to help the airlines, let them fly wherever they want to fly. It's the expensive fatigue crews, not a good thing for safety. I would disagree. It improves flexibility by focusing on those specific operational factors that cause fatigue and mitigating their impact on the crew. You can look at a certain operation. You look at a new route you're scheduling. You look at the airport issues, the weather at that time of the year, and you look at the impact on fatigue and then mitigate the issue because you have some data that says we know what's going on with our crews. It enables operators to improve efficiency without jeopardizing fatigue. That's a huge bone for the operator side. There are situations now where we have a requirement to have 3 pilots in the cockpit flying back and forth to Europe from North America. So they take off in the nighttime, where it's less than 8 hours, and technically they only need 2 pilots. And they come back in the daytime, because of the winds it's a longer flight, but it's more than 8 hours, so you need 3 pilots. Does that make sense scientifically? But that's what we're trying to get beyond. We're trying to say, let's let the operational data and the science drive how we do this in a reasonable and a safe way. Labor agreements. Some people say, this is to get rid of the labor agreements. This is what the operators have been dreaming for. I disagree. Frankly, it accommodates labor agreements in a manner that improves the crew's protection from fatigue-inducing rosters and schedules. And Don Wyckoff can tell you more and more about this, but it's not out there to do in the unions. I think it is a partnership, and with the methods and guidance we've developed, both work and work well. Impact on personnel. Well, you read the rule, it only affects pilots and cabin crew. Not really. It affects all the personnel and managers involved in rostering, route design, training, safety systems, and crew well-being, the medical side. And it assures awareness of fatigue risks at all levels of the organization. Because you're no longer just saying, are they legal? The dynamic is quite different. And the approach, frankly, I'll mention this now, we're not going to discuss it much at this symposium, but this same approach is broadly applicable to all other safety-related personnel, whether it's maintenance, controllers, and so forth. I'm sure those days will come. The scientific basis. Now, some would say, well, it's an unproven scientific concept, does not consider operational factors, and requires complicated scientific procedures. Don't let those scientists get in the middle of this. Well, again, I would disagree. I've tried to illustrate this morning, it's based on 30 years of science. Not science just in the laboratory, scientists out there on the airplanes flying around the world. Some of that's been funded by the FAA, some by NASA, some by the German government, some by the British government, and other governments. But it's not strict laboratory science. We've wrapped the laboratory science into it, and they feed each other very well. And it integrates a scientifically based fatigue risk assessment into operational planning. They're not separate now. That's a quantum change. Data-driven. Some people just say, and I've heard this time and time again, I got the right biomathematical model, I can do FRMS for you. No, That's just the beginning. And others say, all you need is flight data monitoring, no subjective data. No. The biomathematical models are a fairly recent tool that are still in their infancy. So they can be used to initially schedule and screen what a schedule might look like and where the impacts are. And airlines are already doing that, and that's a positive thing. But they're not sufficient. You've got to have a policy. You have to have all the other things that are in the guidance that's available from ICAO. And the model outputs have to be validated. So just like we did with ultra-long range, you develop a model, what looks like a good assessment, you run the operation, you collect data, you revise the model. So it's an iterative process with continuous improvement. Both objective and subjective data are needed, including fatigue reports from the crews. Without those, you don't have an FRMS. Now, from the operator side, they say, well, this allows crews to manipulate the system any way they want, give us the wrong data, they can fake it, and we're at the mercy of these outlier people that just want to cause a problem. Disagree. There are standard statistical techniques that can be used to identify data that originate from artificially manipulated inputs, even on little performance tasks. And such data can be legitimately discarded. And any scientist will tell you that. So I think the protection from the airline side is there to make sure this is legitimate data and it's going to be valid to operate your system. And others say, well, once you get FRMS developed, you got your computer model, it goes on autopilot. No more need to work on it. And once the schedule's been assessed, no more data is needed either. Well, that's not the case. It's a continuous improvement process. What's the need for in-depth data analysis may diminish a bit after you get the schedule going and you've got data saying it's good. You can't stop collecting oversight data, and you have to work that with your regulator. So SMS. Some would say also, well, it's independent from other safety reporting systems. Well, it's based on continuous improvement. It's very much modeled like SMS. It depends on an effective safety reporting culture. I can't emphasize that enough. If your crews feel uncomfortable or intimidated by submitting a fatigue report, you cannot have an FRMS. It's that simple. If I were a regulator and going to an operator and assessing their FRMS, and they tell me that over the last 12 months we've had one report, I would begin to ask a lot of questions. Even if it's because somebody couldn't sleep because his young children were crying all night at home, he should submit a report. That happens. That's life. You got to accept life. It requires routine acquisition and analysis of data, and frankly, ICAO recommends it be integrated with SMS. And you're going to hear more about that later today, too. Regulatory oversight. This is a fear I heard from the committee, the ops panel. Well, it's too complicated to enable sufficient oversight. Frankly, we don't agree. It's based on a very well-defined process now and data analysis. And you can monitor that. We developed the guidance for regulators as well as operators. And I think regulators will find that oversight of FRMS is very similar to oversight of SMS. So in the end, we at ICAO and the committee think that FRMS offers a better way to manage fatigue risk than only operating within duty limits. It takes scientific knowledge and a comprehensive and it's an accountable approach, and I can't emphasize that enough. It represents to me a real paradigm shift in managing fatigue as a safety risk. Not the question of being legal, but are you being tired? And finally, we hope, and I think as Mr. Kobe said earlier, it offers a major opportunity to improve aviation safety worldwide. Thank you for your attention, and please stay awake.